Hello everyone, my name is Amit Singh and welcome to this session or to say series of Configure and Troubleshoot Cube and Cisco Unified Communications Manager. It's gonna be a couple of videos to help you understand how you configure CUCM and how you configure Cisco Unified Border Element so that you could be confident enough to touch these devices and configure and troubleshoot some more things. So let's get quickly started with our first topic where we'll be configuring CUCM side, and we'll be seeing what it is all about. All right, so before even we get started, let's discuss sometimes maybe 1 or 2 minutes about what is a zip trunk and what actually it is. Do you know? I mean, everyone comes up and says, okay, I need a zip trunk, I need a zip trunk. What it is zip trunk? It's more advantageous, over ISDN and what exactly it is. Is it just another ISDN? I think no. It's more than an ISDN, it's more than just providing channels. In the ISDN, you would need to have some voice channels, and it's gonna be more expensive because if you need more concurrent voice uh, channels, then you need to purchase more DIDs from the service provider, so it was way too expensive. With the cube you will have cost savings, it will have a lot of essential capabilities with interoperability and a lot of other extensive features that it provides. That's why nowadays, a lot of companies are moving towards a zip trunk because they could usually make use of their existing internet connection. What you just need is an internet connection, right? Once you have an internet connection, just connect your cube to that internet connection, that to the provider, and that's it. Once you have the username and password or credentials from the provider, you are good to go with the zip trunk. It's that easy, nowadays, and that's why it's widely being used by the companies so that they can use the same internet connection for their data as well as for the voice. So let's have a look. Where do we terminate this zip trunks? What is the termination point? Where do the zip trunk ends it at your premises? Do you already know about it? So this is a small architecture that I thought would be useful. So this is a cloud or internet from the IT service provider, and then this is a normal internet connection or an MPLS data line from the IT service provider to your SBC. So it's not really a Cisco cube. It could be any session border controller. Okay, so what is the session border controller? It's a demarcation point between the DMZ and your enterprise network. All right. So in our case, the SBC is our Cisco Unified Border Element. Now this SBC is connected to the service provider using this SIP trunk. So this is the termination point or the demarcation point for terminating the SIP trunk from the service provider. And on the other side of the SBC, you have your private network or private enterprise network or an enterprise PBX where you have still a zip trunk between the SBC and the enterprise PBX. Okay, so this is how your zip terminates, and this is one of the ways that you could terminate your build your zip trunk topology. So what's the next thing? Let's just quickly talk about some Cube features, So one of the features that Cube has is that it can control a session because it's a session initiation protocol. It's based on sessions, right? It is not based on channel. So it's not like you need some 20 channels or 30 channels to communicate for the voice. So basically, it's all your bandwidth that you have with your service provider, so this is your service provider. It depends how much bandwidth do you have. For example, if you have a 1 gig of bandwidth here, so that means it depends how many sessions that you can pass through. It's no more a channel. So the service provider can provide you a DID bundle, you know, so maybe 000 to 999 DID bundles, and he says, okay, this is your 1 gig link, and you can use as many sessions as it is possible. So if you have 100K of bandwidth for a single voice channel and upload speed I'm talking about, so just divide 1 gig by 100K, and that's your concurrent session that's possible with the SIP trunk, right? It's different than DIDs because for DID, if you have, let's say, 31 channels, then you can have 30 channels for your voice, right? That's it. That means 30 concurrent sessions, and it's going to be expensive. If you want to add more, then you need to pay more, right? It's not the case with the SIP trunks. So yeah, so I was talking about session control. So session control means you could control how many calls are permitted. You could control how the calls are routed because you could do a trunk routing, and then you could also control your quality of service. Let's say you could also monitor, especially your voice quality, what's going wrong, right? And then the second feature is security. So basically, what you would do here is you would register your SBC. In our case, it's a cube. So you will register your cube with the service provider. So the service provider knows, okay, this is the right device, and we are secure over a port 5061, for example, for a secure RTP and secure SIP trunk connection over a TLS, right? And then we can also authenticate each and every call, right? So authentication is another way wherein you can say, okay, I am providing an end-to-end security for my SIP trunk connections, for my SIP trunk calls, right? Then the next thing that I was talking about is interworking. So it's really now very flexible with the SIP that, for example, if the external device is an H323 device, or your CUCM is, for example, if your CUCM is still using H323 connection to the cube, and the cube is here using with the ITSP, the SIP trunk, that still works very well, you know, without any problem. So interoperability with different stacks of H323 is even possible. And then, for example, if the service provider says I only support G711 ULO codec, and then the CUCM is somehow configured for G729, so you do not have to change a much. You could it's interoperable with the help of the cube, you know, because you could do transcoding, transrating, and you could also do codec filtering and a lot of other stuff. You know, if there are DTMF mismatch, that is also taken care by the cube. So one of the other feature is local transcoding interfaces of the cube. That means you do not have to register your cube with the CUCM. So it's a local registration with the cube with the local application. You do not need to open any TCP sockets to your CUCM. You know, it's completely secure nowadays. So it's very simple in configuration as well. So LTI is one of the very good features starting cube, I think 9.0. And then this cube provides a demarcation. That's the very important thing, right? So, for example, if this is your cube and you do not want to show your IP address to the service provider or to the external world, right? So you can hide your address. That's called as address hiding, you know. The other thing that you could do is, let's say, for example, you do not want to send any response to an attacker that's sending you some more requests every time. So what you could do is there is already a built-in feature in cube which says silent discard mechanism. So with the help of this silent discard mechanism, even if the hacker sends some ping messages or something, the cube can just reject it, and then it will not send any response back to the attacker. This will minimize the DDoS attacks, you know. And it is also able to provide the fault isolations, and then it does a layer 5 and layer 7 demarcation. That's a real benefit of cube, so it's like a border element. That's what I told you already. So it's a Cisco unified border element. Okay, so let's get started with the configuration part and what are we gonna do and the other things. So the first thing that we should understand is how is my infrastructure, or how are my server physically connected, so that we proceed further. So the first thing that I have in my lab is a Cisco Unified Communications Manager cluster. So this is my CUCM cluster. So a bunch of servers here, CUCM pub, CUCM sub, like this. And then, of course, it is connected to a switch. And this is installed on my ESXi host. So this is on an ESXi host, and this ESXi is installed on a UCS box. Okay, so this is, for example, let's say UCS C240 chassis, and inside that I have an ESXi host version 6.5. And then on this ESXi, I have this virtual machines. So VM1, VM2, and I have several other virtual machines like Cisco Unity connections and everything. So let's forget about that. Just focus on Cisco Unified Communications Manager right now. So this UCS chassis is connected to a switch, and then this is again connected to an ISR router. So this is an ISR 4331, you know, and this is configured as a cube. This router has two interfaces. This is interface gig 0/0. This is the LAN interface, so local area network interface that connects to the Cisco Unified Communications Manager. And this goes to the service provider SIP trunk via a SIP trunk. So this is the SIP trunk. Okay, so this is my zip trunk, and then this zip trunk is connected to one of the service providers, um, whatever. So ABC SIP service provider or a telecom company, so this is a service provider. And this interface is my external interface gig 0/0/1. So this is how the current lab is on which we are going to talk about. So you could have some different scenarios. You could have, for example, on this external interface you might have a firewall, which I don't have right now, but most of the companies, a lot of companies do have, or they do not have a firewall. So what is very important is, if you have a firewall, make sure you check the SIP ALG, if there is any SIP ALG, or SIP inspection configuration on these firewalls, because these are the things that would cause you some problems like one-way audio, no audio, call forwarding issues, and everything, So make sure you check these things on the SIP inspection should be turned on, and the SIP ALG should be disabled. Okay, so if you do not disable SIP ALG, what happens is the natting is done two times. Sometimes there is no natting, and then private address is forwarded to your private IP address on the STP header is sent to your service provider, and then service provider doesn't know where to send the RTP back because the this private IP address in the SDP connection information header is not routable, so this is why you have some audio issues. Going forward, we will be also talking about some troubleshooting tips and tricks, and so make sure you watch this series. It's gonna be an interesting series. One more very important thing is that you should always check about what kind of interface is this gig 0/0/1. Okay, it could be that the service provider provides you a copper connection. So the copper connection is like an RJ45 connection. All right, it could be, I have seen scenarios where a service provider previously had a fiber cable laid down at the customer premise, and then he says, okay, now also I need to lay down a fiber connection. All right, so if it's a fiber connection or it's a different connection than the copper, then you might need to have an interface that can be supported by this ISR 4331 router. For example, if it's a fiber connection, then you would need something called as an SFP module for the fiber to RJ45 connections. So you could plug in those SFP modules, and that should be supported by this ISR 4331 routers. Or sometimes the provider says, okay, I have provided you this TAE connection. So something, there's this interfaces are usually I have seen in Europe or in Germany, where a provider just has sent a TAE connection. So it's not a normal RJ45 cable. It's a telephony adapter. And for this, to be connected, you need an adapter. So make sure that you have an TAE adapter to convert the line to the RJ45 connection, or to modify the interface to the RJ45 connection so that you could plug into the interface gig 0/0/1. Or it could be that the provider has an RJ11 cable or something, so you might, if it's an ADSL connection from your SIP provider, or something like ADSL or DSL connection from your service provider. So what then you would need something called as a dialer interface, you know, and that dialer interface needs to be connected on the network interface module. That means you need another hardware on your ISR router that's called as network interface module minus, I think that's VB or VIB. I think that's the part number on the Cisco. So please check you have the correct network interface module on your router so that you do not connect on this gig interface, gig 0/0/1. Rather, you connect on your DSL interface on the router or the NIM interface on the router with the right um, uh, NIM card, you know. So make sure that you have this ordered already for a customer, or if you are looking for a migration from ISDN to SIP trunk, make sure that you have the right interface. Else it would give you a lot of problems, because I have seen customers who at the end have to use something here in Europe. It's very famous. It's called as a Fritz box, you know. So it's like a modem stuff, or a router come modem stuff, so that you could connect your service provider connection into that multi-port device, and then from there you could use the zip trunk. Okay, so make sure you understand what the interface is or what kind of connection it is. Is this zip interface or is this zip trunk going directly over an internet connection? Because usually it's like, you have ordered a zip trunk, and then your zip trunk connection, it will go over an internet connection of the service provider, and then the service provider will provide you something called as a username and password. So there will be a username for this zip trunk, and then there will be a password for this zip trunk account. Okay, so there might be uh, a possibility that the service provider says, okay, you need to register your cube to our platform. So for this you need the username and password so that you could register this ISR 4331 router to the service provider, okay, for the zip trunk connection. And then you would also need usually it's the same username and password to authenticate the numbers or the DID number authentication. So DID authentication, so that whenever there is an outgoing call, the service provider will be authenticate um, the calls using those username and password. Okay, so sometimes the provider says, okay, I need to register all your numbers, all your DIDs that we have provided it to you, or we have reserved it for you. So it could be for some small customers, or let's say they just have 20 DIDs or 30 DIDs, and they would say, okay, I want to register all these 30 DIDs. And sometimes they say, okay, you can just authenticate or register your main number with us and we are fine. Okay, so make sure you understand all these requirements with the service provider that I told you right now, because if you forget one of these things, then it could be a problem with your calls, because the calls will not work, and then you have to go back and forth with your service provider. What's the problem? What are the things, or why is it not working, and all sorts of stuff. So this is why I told you guys last time as well in my first video about the requirements of a zip trunk, that you really understand the requirement of a service provider, and then you really understand the hardware uh, information about this cube. Okay, then let's move further. So the next thing that we are going to go and do is, I will be dividing this video in couple of parts so that we understand better in less time, and then you could also take time and maybe have a look afterwards. So the first thing that we would be doing is configuring an enterprise network for the cube. So the enterprise network. The second thing what we'd be doing is we would be configuring the ITSP side configuration. So ITSP config. All right. So this means that this is our CUCM side config in the first way, and in the second we would be doing the cube side of the configurations. And again, in the cube side of the configuration, I would divide it into the important zip configs, the basic zip configs that is needed for a cube to work, you know, and then we would have a look at um, the routing part of the configurations, the routing. Then we are gonna look about um, advanced features of a cube. So this would be advanced features, and then we are gonna look about troubleshooting. So this would be about it with the ITSP side of the configurations, and this is called call routing. Okay, so make sure you go through all these videos to understand from from the basic perspective, how do you configure a CUCM, how do you configure a zip profile, how do you configure a zip trunk, and how do you see it's registered, what are the requirements of the service providers and everything else. All right, so let's move to our next sessions. So do watch my next session, and then in there we will talk about the enterprise network configuration, that is about the CUCM configuration that is needed for the zip trunk. All right, thank you.